She helped a simple man on the road, not knowing he was the billionaire who owned the entire city. Before we begin, tell us, where are you watching from? We love to know how far our stories are reaching, and if you enjoy love stories full of emotion, twists, and heartwarming endings, make sure to subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss any of our videos, and you'll help us keep bringing you inspiring and moving content. The rain was falling lightly, almost silently, as the streets of Charlotte shimmered with golden reflections from the streetlights. The late afternoon brought with it a damp, cutting cold that seemed to slip through the cracks in people's coats and settle deep in their bones. Hailey Monroe gripped the steering wheel tightly, the windshield wipers struggling against the fog and the stubborn drops that blurred her view. She was on her way back from the hospital, where she had dropped off her grandmother's medical documents. Fatigue showed clearly on her face, deep under eye circles, her hair tied up in a messy bun, and the same worn-out denim jacket she had been wearing since college. She barely made enough to support the two of them, but never let the weight she carried show. Her blue-gray eyes still held a soft sparkle despite everything. Then, as she turned onto a side road, she spotted an old pickup truck pulled over on the shoulder, its hood open, and a man hunched over, hands covered in grease, working on the engine. The hazard lights blinked weakly in the rain. Instinctively, she slowed down, but hesitated. That area wasn't exactly safe. It was dark. She was alone. But there was something about the man that caught her attention. Even soaking wet, dirty and unshaven, there was a kind of dignity in the way he tried, alone, to fix something clearly beyond repair. When he looked up and met her gaze for a moment, the world seemed to stop. It wasn't fear. It wasn't suspicion. It was as if he was saying without words, "I have no one." Her heart pounding, she pulled the car over. "Mister, are you okay?" she asked, her voice firm but kind as she rolled down the window. The man stood up slowly. He was tall, broad-shouldered, but visibly exhausted. He wore a soaked grey t-shirt, clinging to his body, drenched jeans and mud-covered sneakers. Even so, when he spoke, his voice was calm, almost too polite for the situation. "I don't mean to scare you. My truck died and my phone's dead too. I've been trying to fix it, but it's no use." She looked around. The road was empty. No stores, no gas stations nearby. Just that vast wetness and the sound of rain on asphalt. "Want me to give you a ride to the Pine Street station? It's about 5 minutes from here. You can call someone or wait for a tow truck there," she offered, even as doubt pulsed in her chest. The man hesitated. His green eyes were tired, but there was something else in them she couldn't quite place. Something broken. Something real. "You sure? I don't want to be a bother. I swear I can walk." "Just get in before we freeze out here," she said, unlocking the passenger door. He got in silently. The car smelled of lavender mixed with old coffee. She turned on the heater, avoiding direct eye contact. He looked uncomfortable, like someone who wasn't used to being helped. "What's your name?" she asked, trying to break the ice. He hesitated for a second, as if carefully choosing. "Cole. Cole Turner." She nodded with a faint smile, having no idea he had just used his mother's last name, a quick lie to protect his real identity. Hailey Monroe," she replied. The ride continued in silence for a few minutes until Cole murmured, "You don't know who I am, do you?" She frowned, surprised. "Was I supposed to?" He smiled faintly, his eyes lost in the window. "No, that's a good thing." When they arrived at the station, she parked. The cold light from the signs reflected off the windshield, and he turned to her with a strange look, part gratitude, part sadness. "You didn't have to do this, you know." "I know. But I did." He stepped out of the car and, before closing the door, looked at her one more time. "Thank you, Hailey, really." She simply nodded. But as he walked away toward the gas station's payphone, a thought struck her like silent lightning. There was something more about that man. Something that was going to change everything, and she was about to find out that by stopping on that road, she hadn't just picked up a stranger, but a man who held the power to completely change her fate and that of the entire city. Night in Nashville kept its chilly breeze, even though inside Evan's small apartment there was now a quiet warmth born from children's laughter and the newly found sense of family. After the tension of the reunion and safety finally restored, the days started to fall into place. Simple routines, small gestures, shared meals. It was on one of those peaceful nights, while Emily dozed off with a book in her hands and the other little ones lay scattered across sleeping mats and cushions, that Cole Bennett entered the picture. Cole was a 38-year-old man, tall, always well-dressed, with features that revealed a life of privilege, neatly combed hair, a gold watch on his left wrist, and light eyes that always seemed to hold a sense of dissatisfaction. Fate had brought him there for reasons he himself didn't yet understand. He was in Nashville only for a business meeting with investors in a luxury condominium expansion project. But something made him stay a little longer. Maybe it was the city, or maybe it was the emptiness inside him that no Manhattan penthouse could fill. That afternoon, Cole had stopped by the diner where Jessica worked on weekends to help support. The newly opened Casa Esperanza. That's where he saw Hailey for the first time. Hailey Johnson was 26. Light-skinned brunette with faint freckles on her face and brown eyes that seemed to know more than they let on. She wore a coffee-stained apron, her hair tied in a messy bun, and the worn-out sneakers of someone who's lived far more than their age might suggest. She lived in a small studio in the suburbs with her grandmother, Margot, who was battling a degenerative lung disease and required constant oxygen. Even tired, Hailey had an aura that radiated peace. Her smile was simple but welcoming, and her voice, though gentle, carried a certain firmness, as if every word she spoke had been carefully chosen. After her shift ended, nearly 9 at night, Hailey approached Cole, who was sitting alone in the back of the diner, wearing a suit. He hadn't ordered anything, just sat observing. "You look like you need coffee more than silence," she said, offering a small smile. Cole looked up, surprised by the unexpected kindness. "Maybe I need both," he replied honestly, and Hailey, without hesitation, brought him a steaming cup, along with 2 packets of sugar and a napkin that had a child's doodle, drawn by Luna, who worked with her on Saturdays. "It's on the house, or better yet, on someone who once was too tired to pay for coffee," she said. Cole didn't know what to say. He just lowered his eyes and nodded, touched by something he couldn't name. As he slowly sipped the coffee, he kept watching her from afar. Hailey cleaned tables, helped an elderly man stand up with patience, laughed with a little boy who had spilled his juice, and massaged the shoulders of a pregnant co-worker who was complaining about back pain. It was as if her time belonged to everyone, except herself. By the end of the shift, as the lights were being turned off, Hailey grabbed her worn-out coat and headed toward the door. Cole followed her silently to the sidewalk. The streets were empty, and the distant sound of a saxophone echoed from some apartment nearby. "Do you always treat everyone with that much care?" he asked without thinking much. Hailey stopped, looking at him calmly. "Not everyone treats me well, but that doesn't change who I am." He looked away, embarrassed by his own question. But she continued, "My grandma used to say the world's already tough enough, so if we can be someone's rest, then we should be." "And who's your rest?" he asked softly. She laughed, but with sadness in her eyes. "Haven't found that yet, but that's okay. I lean on God and coffee." The answer lingered in the air, painful and beautiful at the same time. Cole wanted to say more, wanted to understand more about that simple woman who spoke like someone who had seen rock bottom and still knew how to make flowers bloom in the cracks. She said goodbye with a "good night, mister" in the sad suit, and walked down the street with slow steps, disappearing under the yellow glow of the streetlights. That night, Cole returned to the hotel carrying more than just a business briefcase. Something had been stirred inside him, a different kind of restlessness. For the first time, he felt like someone had truly seen him, without asking for his last name. The next day, even before the sun rose, Hailey woke up to the sound of Margot's coughing. She got up, made mint tea with honey, helped her grandmother into the armchair, set up the oxygen tube, and sat there holding her hand. "You're exhausted, sweetheart," Margot whispered. "Maybe, but when I look at you, I remember why it's worth it." Outside, the world went on, unaffected. But inside that small studio, smelling of tea and medicine, there was a quiet strength, the kind that comes from having little, yet still giving everything you can. The city of Charlotte carried on between muffled horns and the sharp winds of autumn, but something in Hailey's life had begun to shift subtly, like leaves falling quietly before a storm. In the days following the encounter at the gas station, Cole came back. Not just physically, but with a quiet, steady presence that started to fill the empty spaces in her daily life. He always arrived early, before the first batch of muffins at the restaurant, sat at the same table near the window, and read whatever old newspaper was lying around. And when she had a break, they talked about books, childhood, music, never about the future, never about the past. He always wore simple but clean clothes. Frayed jeans, a brown jacket that smelled of old leather, and worn-out shoes gave away a man who had come from far away, but who knew how to hide where exactly from. "You're kind of like a walking mystery," Hailey said one morning, handing him a steaming latte. "No social media, don't talk about your family, and you ask questions like you're studying real life." Cole smiled, masking his discomfort. "Maybe I'm just trying to remember what it's like to live away from the cameras." "Were you famous?" she teased, laughing. "No, but I grew up surrounded by people who were." There was always a pause in his words, like he weighed every sentence, afraid to break the moment. Hailey noticed that, but never pushed. She liked being near him, even though she couldn't say exactly why. It was like breathing near a fireplace. It didn't matter where the heat came from, only that it was there. One Sunday afternoon, the two of them walked together to the lake at Freedom Park. Red and golden leaves floated on the water's surface, and children played in the background as the sun began to set. Hailey nudged small stones with her foot, and the silence between them felt comfortable. "Have you ever loved someone?" she asked, not looking at him. Cole took his time. The breeze ruffled his hair and blew dry leaves toward the shore. "Yes, but they never loved who I really was, only what they could get from me." She glanced at him, surprised by the sudden honesty, and for the first time she felt her chest tighten. She wanted to know who that man really was, not out of curiosity, but because she wanted to care for whatever she might find inside. Meanwhile, the city had begun to whisper. At a downtown cafe, a City Hall employee thought he recognized the reclusive air of Whitaker Enterprises. Cole Whitaker, the man who had vanished from headlines after a string of public refusals to back real estate expansion strategies that threatened low-income communities. Someone took a photo of him, a side profile, walking with Hailey in the park, a gray beanie partly covering his face. And the image popped up on Reddit that very night with the caption, "Hidden billionaire? Did Cole Whitaker give it all up and is now pretending to be an average guy in Charlotte?" The comments spread like wildfire. Some called it fake news, others believed it without question, but the damage was done. The city was already seeing him differently, even if he didn't know it yet. The next morning, Hailey noticed something off at the restaurant. People who had never been there before, young folks with phones in hand, local influencers pretending to vlog while filming discreetly. She started to feel uneasy when a couple said loudly, "Did you see the new guy working here? Think he's really the guy who owns half the city?" That night, when Cole came to walk with her like usual, she wasn't hiding her tension anymore. Her hands were trembling, her gaze kept shifting away. They stopped in the empty square, the lit-up fountain casting reflections across the damp sidewalk. "Tell me now, who are you really?" she asked, her voice firm but choked. "Because people are taking your picture, spreading theories online, and I don't even know your last name." He took a deep breath, turning his gaze to the fountain. The lights cast a golden halo around his face, as if the truth were about to be washed clean in the open air. "I didn't lie. I just didn't say everything." "Then say it now," she pressed, her heart racing. "My name is Cole Whitaker. My family owns several properties around here. I got tired of being treated like a number, an investment, a headline, so I disappeared. I came here to remember who I am without all that, but when I met you, I couldn't leave. Hailey took a step back. It felt like the ground had been pulled out from under her. The wind felt colder now. The square, once warm and welcoming, had turned into the stage for a silent disappointment. "You hid behind my kindness." And I opened. "Up to you thinking we were the same. Do you think that's fair?" "I didn't want you to see me the way everyone else does. I just wanted to be just Cole, just a man." "But you're not just a man. You're someone who lied when it mattered most, to be honest." She turned away, holding back tears. "You don't understand how hard it is to trust someone when your whole life has taught you no one ever stays." And she walked away, swallowing her cry, leaving Cole standing under the square's lights, surrounded by falling leaves, like masks with nowhere left to hide. Hailey didn't sleep that night. Cole's words kept echoing inside her like a slow wave crashing against the walls of her chest. Cole Whitaker, a name that sounded like it came from a business magazine. And in fact, she vaguely remembered reading something about him. But she never imagined that the man in worn-out clothes, who wiped his boots with a napkin and carried his soul in his eyes, was the heir to an empire. The next morning, the restaurant where she worked was busier than usual for a Monday. The customers weren't the usual crowd. There were men in suits, women clutching smartphones, restrained laughter and whispers behind menus. She felt like she was being watched under an invisible microscope. As she balanced a tray of waffles and bacon, she overheard a customer at table 3 say, without even trying to whisper, "Told you." "It's him. Same walk, same way of stirring his coffee. That's Cole Whitaker. My brother worked on his penthouse remodel in Uptown. Never forgot that cold stare." Hailey froze in the middle of the aisle, her whole body stiff. She slowly returned to the counter, the tray trembling slightly in her hands. Minutes later, Cole walked in. He wore a clean navy blue shirt and well-fitted jeans. His hair was a bit tousled from the wind, and his closed-off expression was a stark contrast to his usual calm. He looked uncomfortable, like someone who knew he couldn't hide anymore. As soon as he stepped through the door, an older man in a beige suit suddenly stood up from one of the tables in the back. He wore a flashy gold watch and a bright blue pocket square that clashed with the setting. He approached Cole with a look of surprise and sarcasm. "Can't believe it. Whitaker, in the flesh," he said loudly, drawing everyone's attention. Cole stopped, tense. Hailey watched from the counter, her chest tight, like the air had been sucked from the room. "Playing common man now, are you?" the man continued, laughing. "Or did you come to see how the poor live before buying up another piece of the city?" An awkward silence fell over the restaurant. The customers pretended to keep eating, but all eyes were on the two men. "Stay in your lane, Ronald," Cole said firmly, his jaw clenched. "Funny. I thought that's exactly what you didn't want to hear coming from someone like me." Hailey couldn't take it anymore. She stepped out from behind the counter and walked toward them, hands trembling, her face pale. "Is it true?" she asked, looking straight into his eyes. "Are you really the one who owns all this?" Cole hesitated. The restaurant, the neighborhood, maybe even her apartment's rent, all of it might somehow be in his hands. He looked at Hailey and, this time, didn't try to hide. "Yes," he said softly but firmly. "I own half this block, but I never meant to lie to you. I just didn't know how to tell you without losing you." She took a deep breath, like she needed air just to stay standing. "So you knew. You knew from the start this was yours. And still, you let me believe. We were equals." "I didn't want what we had to be tainted by my name," he insisted. "I just wanted you to see me as a man, not a legacy." "But you don't get it," she said, her voice catching. "Around here, everything's already too hard. The last thing I needed was to find out that even my freedom was in the hands of someone pretending not to have power, and without." Waiting for an answer, Hailey walked out the front door, eyes watery, steps quick, trying to escape not just the cameras and the stares, but the feeling of being deceived. Again, Cole stood there, surrounded by curious eyes, shoulders slumped. In that moment, not all the money in the world could buy back what he had just lost. Across the street, a teenager was recording everything on their phone. The video was online before Cole could even sit down. The truth had escaped. And now, there was no turning back. Maybe shame didn't come with words. It came with looks. The day after the confrontation at the restaurant, Hailey woke up to her phone blowing up with notifications, messages from unknown numbers, tags in videos, screenshots of conversations she'd never taken part in. In the first one, a 20-second video showed her face full of pain, staring at Cole. The amplified audio captured only one line: "You let me believe we were equals." The caption was cruel. "Waitress rejects billionaire out of pride. Regret in 3, 2, 1. She turned off her phone. She couldn't breathe. The small room smelled of dry laundry and old lavender, and her grandmother, asleep on the couch, coughed. Quietly, unaware that her granddaughter's world was being torn apart in public. At the restaurant, everything had changed. What used to be a quiet routine of coffee and pancakes was now a stage for disguised judgment. The customers no longer looked at her the same. There were crooked smiles, phones suspiciously positioned, and conversations that suddenly stopped. When she approached the tables, she thought she was dating a mechanic, a teenage girl whispered to her mom while stirring her milkshake. Turns out she was dining with the king of the city. Even her co-workers now looked at her with a kind of bitter envy. Sarah, a waitress from the afternoon shift, walked over with a cynical smile. "So, Hailey, still waiting tables when you could be serving champagne on his yacht," she said while adjusting the cups like it was just another day. Hailey replied with a blank smile and watery eyes, gripping the tray like a shield. But inside, she felt raw with humiliation. The worst was yet to come. Outside, a small group of onlookers waited by the exit. 2 men with amateur cameras and a woman holding out a podcast mic in her direction. "Hailey, are you hurt by what Cole did? Is it true he offered you money to keep quiet? Do you think you lost the love of your life because of pride?" She didn't answer. She walked past them in silence, eyes fixed on the ground. Each question hit like a stone against cracked glass. That night when she got home, her grandmother was waiting with a cup of tea on the living room table and a worried look in her eyes. "Do you want to tell me what's going on, sweetheart?" Hailey sat beside her, her body trembling, and finally cried. A quiet cry, no sobs, the kind of pain that burns on the inside but can't find a voice. Hours later, just past midnight, someone knocked at the door. She looked out the window and her heart raced. Cole was standing under the street lamp, his face half lit, hands deep in his coat pockets. There was tiredness in his posture. Not physical, exhaustion, but the weight of guilt. She hesitated, but opened the door. "I had to see you," he said, his voice low. I can't stand knowing I hurt you like this." Hailey looked at him for what felt like an eternity. She wore an old, grey hoodie, her hair tied back carelessly, and her face was swollen from holding back too many tears. But her eyes were clear, steady, and strong. "You lied to me when it mattered most, to be honest," she said, "and now everyone thinks I'm some gold digger who turned down a billionaire out of pride. No one asks what it's like to love. Someone thinking you're in the same boat, only to find out he owns the ocean." Cole tried to move closer. "I swear I never meant to deceive you. I just couldn't take being seen for my last name anymore. With you, I could finally breathe." "You breathed," she replied, "but you left me suffocating." He stopped. The street was silent, except for the distant sound of a car passing and leaves rustling in the wind. "I never wanted to buy you, Hailey. I never saw you as beneath me. I love you for who you are." Her stomach turned at those words. Part of her wanted to run into his arms, but another part, the wounded, wary, tired part, couldn't trust him anymore. "You love me, Cole, but I can't love someone who hides who they are when all I ever gave was the truth." He stood still, taking the rejection like a silent blow. Then he nodded quietly and took a step back. "If you ever want to talk, if you ever want to try again, I don't want to be just another woman who loves you for who you are at the bank." She cut him off and closed the door, gently but firmly. She didn't cry right away. She sat down on the living room floor, leaned her head against the wall, and closed her eyes. The silence seemed heavier than any sound. Across the city, while her videos kept being shared as entertainment, a 27-year-old woman decided she wouldn't let the world define who she was, nor let a powerful name erase the value of her own dignity. The sound of the automatic gate echoed off the tall walls of the estate in Myers Park. The black pickup truck glided down the perfectly paved driveway, cutting through the silence like it was breaking a bubble from another world. Cole stepped out of the car, shoulders heavy and eyes dull, as if every step echoed the guilt he'd carried since Hailey closed that door in his face. The mansion welcomed him with the same silence as always, cold, flawless, empty. The white walls were lined with modern art he had never chosen. Everything there had been arranged to impress, but now none of it made sense. He took off his shoes at the base of the stairs and left them there, like someone shedding armor that no longer protects. He went straight to the bedroom and stood in front of the mirror for a long time. The reflection showed a well-dressed man, clean-shaven, hair perfectly styled. But what he saw in the eyes was something else. It was absence. It was loneliness disguised as success. "Who are you, Cole?" he whispered to himself, staring into the mirror. He remembered Hailey's expression when she said she couldn't love someone who hid their true self. That line hurt more than any scandal, more than any headline, because it was true. The next day, he cancelled a meeting with investors, ignored emails from shareholders, and asked his PR team to call off all public appearances for the coming months. The media was puzzled, but no one dared challenge him. For the first time, Cole Whitaker disappeared not out of fear, but by choice. Without telling anyone, he started walking through the city's poorer neighborhoods. Worn jeans, a cap pulled low over his face, slow steps. He wanted to see for himself what his empire had ignored for years. In Hailey's neighborhood, he passed unnoticed. The cracked sidewalks, tangled wires hanging between utility poles, faded paint on old buildings, all of it spoke louder than any bank account. He sat on a park bench and watched. Kids playing soccer with a crushed soda bottle, an elderly man pulling a cart full of recyclables, mothers with tired eyes walking home from the market with nearly empty bags. And then he knew what he needed to do. He called his personal lawyer that same afternoon. "I want to transfer control of Whitaker Properties to the temporary board. No press, no announcement. And I want to start a full renovation of the housing units in the south side. Quiet, anonymous." On the other end of the line, the lawyer hesitated. "Mr. Whitaker, this could be seen as an emotional crisis." "It's not a crisis. It's a decision. And for the first time in my life, it's mine." Cole personally visited the construction sites when the renovations began. The crews, surprised by his presence, saw him carrying boxes of supplies, overseeing roof rebuilds, painting walls alongside young volunteers. At the community school where Hailey sometimes taught as a substitute, new heaters were installed, and the electrical system was completely redone. She heard about the renovation, but no one said who was behind it. They only talked about the anonymous benefactor who showed up in a cap and gloves always at the end of the day and disappeared before anyone could thank him. One afternoon, Hailey came home from school with cold hands and aching feet. As she walked down her street, she saw the little senior center she used to visit with her grandmother had been completely renovated. New roof, new chairs, working heaters. An elderly woman approached her, smiling. "They say a young man came here one night, insisted on staying anonymous. He just left this for you." It was a handwritten note, simple. She recognized the handwriting instantly. "I can't go back in time, Hailey, but I can try to make sure it doesn't repeat itself. I don't want forgiveness. I just want you to know you've taught me more than any inheritance ever did. CW." She closed her eyes for a moment, holding the paper against her chest. It still hurt. It was still hard to trust. But for the first time, she saw actions, not words, silent truths, not promises. Across the city, Cole watched from a distance. He didn't want applause. He didn't want to be seen. He only wanted to deserve to be better, and maybe one day to deserve to be seen again by her. Winter arrived early that year in Charlotte. The wind swept dry leaves violently along. The sidewalks and the windows of houses creaked under the weight of the changing season. Hailey now split her days between extra shifts at the community school and quiet nights beside her grandmother, whose health had grown more fragile with time. Mrs. Margaret, with her silver hair and delicate, always trembling hands, insisted on keeping her routine. "I don't want to be a burden," she would say softly, even when she needed help just to walk to the kitchen. Hailey would smile, care for her quietly, and bury her fear deep inside. That cold afternoon, as she returned from the pharmacy with a bag of medication, Hailey felt a chill run down her spine. Something wasn't right. Turning the corner to her house, she saw neighbors gathered at the door. One of them rushed toward her. "It's your grandmother. She fell. They called an ambulance." The world seemed to spin. Hailey dropped everything and ran, pushing through the crowd. She found Mrs. Margaret on the floor in the living room, her face pale, her eyes half open. A thin line of blood trickled from her left temple. The blanket she had tried to grab from the couch lay folded beside her. "Grandma, I'm here! Please stay with me!" Hailey cried, kneeling beside her, gripping her cold hand in desperation. At the public hospital, the smell of disinfectant was strong, the fluorescent lights harsh, and the waiting room chairs were packed. Hailey sat with her hands clasped, trembling. Doctors came and went without answers. Time stretched out like a rope about to snap. Hours later, a doctor approached with a restrained expression. "Her condition is delicate. The fall caused a small internal hemorrhage. Ideally, she should be transferred to St. Clair's Surgical Center, but..." Hailey cut him off, distressed. "But we can't afford it." The doctor didn't answer. He just looked away. She got up, walked to the empty hallway, and rested her forehead against the cold wall. The pain of losing her grandmother was unbearable, but the helplessness of not being able to do anything, that was even worse. Then she felt someone behind her. She turned slowly, already recognizing the silence. Cole was there, standing still with a somber expression, his eyes fixed on her like he carried the weight of every second he had stayed away. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I heard about the accident," he said. "I couldn't stay away." "You can't buy this too, Cole." "I'm not here to buy anything. I'm here because I care." She took a deep breath, torn between anger and exhaustion. "You paid for the transfer, didn't you? The doctor just told me she's going to St. Clair." He hesitated for a moment, then nodded, just barely. "I didn't want her to wait another second. I would have done it even if you never found out." The words broke down her defenses. Hailey felt her legs weaken. She looked at the man, standing before her, the same one who had once hidden his identity, but who now did everything without asking for credit, without expecting forgiveness. The tears came without resistance. "Why do you still care about me, Cole?" He stepped closer, and with a tenderness almost unrecognizable in his voice, he answered, "Because you saw me when no one else did." She hugged him, not out of impulse, but out of need. It was a hug full of pain, of relief, of choked-up gratitude, a hug that didn't erase the past, but in that moment built a bridge over the gap that had separated them. Cole held her tightly, feeling her sobs against his chest, and he knew then, no matter how much money he had, that this moment was what he had always been searching for. On the other side of the ICU glass, Mrs. Margaret slept peacefully, unaware of the silent reconciliation that had just begun. In the days following her grandmother's transfer to the private hospital, Hailey kept to herself. She barely spoke to anyone except the medical staff and Cole, who showed up every evening in silence, bringing fresh flowers for Mrs. Margaret's bedside and hot coffee for the long nights in the waiting room. Their time together was lighter now, but filled with care, like two people walking over shattered glass, trying not to cut their feet again. It was after the discharge, when Hailey finally returned to the community school to teach, that she realized the city had taken notice of what had happened. Two co-workers approached her in the parking lot with fake smiles and overly curious eyes. "So it's true," said a history teacher, running her fingers through her hair as if fixing her words into something venomous. "You and Cole Whitaker again. What an unlikely love story. Or should I say, convenient." Hailey tried to ignore it, but as she walked through the school hallway, she overheard a group of moms whispering. She said she didn't want his money, but the minute he came back, she ran right back into his arms. Of course she did. Who in their right mind turns down a billionaire? As if someone like him would even look at her if she were just a waitress. Those words stung like salt in wounds that had barely begun to heal. But this time, something inside her refused to retreat. She had already lost her peace, her reputation, and almost her grandmother. What more could she lose by finally speaking up? That same night, locked in her small apartment bedroom with the lights off and just the lamp on, Hailey set up her phone. On a stack of books. She wore a simple t-shirt, her hair in a loose bun, her face bare. She wanted them to see the truth for what it was, raw, honest, unfiltered. She took a deep breath, looked straight into the camera and began. "My name is Hailey Monroe, and yes, I was ridiculed for loving a man who said he had nothing, only to find out he was one of the wealthiest men in the city." Her voice was steady but gentle. "I could stay quiet, pretend I moved on, let people say I went back to him for the status, for the comfort, out of fear. But that's not why. I went back because he changed, because the man who once was afraid to be seen became someone who doesn't need to hide anymore." She told the whole story, with pauses, with truth. She shared how she met Cole, how they fell in love when things were still simple, and how betrayed she felt when she learned who he really was. She admitted the pain, the public humiliation, and also the silent act that saved her grandmothers. life. But most importantly, she didn't apologize. I don't owe anyone anything but my conscience, and today, my conscience is clear. Before finishing, she looked at the screen like she was speaking directly to every person who had judged her. If you've never loved someone for who they are and not for what they have, maybe you'll never understand. But I hope someday you will. The video lasted just over 3 minutes. She posted it without a second thought and went to sleep with no expectations. The next morning, her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Over 2,000 comments, thousands of shares. The video had passed 100,000 views in less than 12 hours. But unlike last time, the reaction was different. The comments had changed. "This woman is brave," she said. "What so?" "Many feel but can't put into words." Finally, a real love story with truth. That man's lucky to have someone like her. In the neighborhood, people started greeting her differently. Not with sarcasm, but with respect. At the restaurant, a long-time customer looked her in the eye and said, "Thanks for reminding us what really matters." Later that afternoon, Cole found her in the park where it all began. She was sitting on the same bench, holding a cup of hot tea. "I saw the video," he said, stopping in front of her. "I needed to say what no one had the guts to ask," Hailey replied, looking at the orange-streaked sky. "You stood up for me, even after everything," he murmured, almost with guilt. "I didn't defend you. I told the truth. You're the one defending yourself now with the actions you've taken." He sat beside her in silence, and for a moment they weren't billionaire and waitress. They weren't headlines. They were just two souls trying to find each other again among the ruins of a love interrupted. And there was something different in both their eyes, something that came after the pain, after the fall. Something that maybe was the beginning of a new beginning. Spring's breeze had started to soften the air in Charlotte, as if the whole city was finally exhaling after a long winter. Wildflowers were blooming shyly through cracked sidewalks, and the neighborhood where Hailey had been born was finally regaining its color. She walked alongside Cole down the main street in the south side, where the modest houses looked more alive. The windows had new curtains, the facades were freshly painted, and the walls, once tagged and forgotten, now featured vibrant murals created by local youth. It was a new beginning, not just for them, for everyone. At the newly renovated community center, a blue and white banner read, "Renaissance Institute, Training, Dignity, and Future." Hailey and Cole had created the project together. The idea was born during a night of conversation under the stars, when he asked what she would do if she had the means to change the world. "I'd give people real opportunities," Hailey answered without hesitation. "Trade programs, workshops, a place where young people could learn something school doesn't teach, to believe they have value." Cole listened silently, and that same week he gathered a group of engineers, educators, and community leaders. But unlike before, he didn't give orders. He listened, he joined meetings, he visited homes. He sat with families on worn-out couches and heard stories he used to prefer ignoring. Hailey coordinated everything with both firmness and compassion. Gradually, people stopped seeing her as the billionaire's girl and started seeing her as a respected leader. One morning, during a discussion circle with young apprentices, a 17-year-old boy raised his hand and asked, "So, are you two like a real couple, like the ones in charge of all this?" Cole laughed, leaning against the wall, and looked at Hailey. "She's in charge. I just try to keep up," he replied. The laughter that followed was light, genuine. Hailey looked at the boy and added, "We're only here because someone once believed in us. Now it's your turn to believe in yourselves." Beyond the non-profit, Cole took things further. He pulled the old files from his company and discovered dozens of properties legally claimed, but taken in ethically questionable ways during past expansions. Families had lost their homes to make way for luxury buildings, and even though he hadn't personally signed off on every decision, the name was his. And that was enough. In a public press conference in front of reporters and local residents, he spoke for the first time as the real Cole Whitaker. For years, I let others speak for me. Today, I'm here to speak for those who weren't heard. I'm giving back every lot, every inch of land that was taken without respect. Not out of legal obligation, but out of conscience. The cameras flashed non-stop, but this time, he wasn't standing alone. Hailey stood beside him, her hands intertwined with his, her gaze steady. And it was she who closed the conference. No future is solid when it's built on the ruins of injustice. We're rebuilding together with truth and with those who truly matter. In the weeks that followed, the city saw real change. Young people who once felt invisible landed their first jobs. Unemployed women returned to school, elderly residents took part in cultural workshops, and the walls of the city began to tell a new story, not one of power and inequality, but of redemption and unity. One night, lying beneath a clear sky, in the open field behind the center, Hailey stared at the stars, her head resting on Cole's chest. "Are you still afraid of being seen?" she asked softly. "No, because now I see myself," he replied. She smiled, closing her eyes, while the silence was filled only by the sound of the wind dancing through the trees. There, on ground where pain had once lived, something larger than forgiveness had begun to grow. Purpose. Autumn returned to paint the streets of Charlotte in golden and reddish tones. Leaves drifted slowly onto the sidewalk in front of the same small restaurant where it all began. The modest storefront was decorated with string lights and vases of fresh sunflowers, carefully arranged by people from the community. There was no luxury, no paparazzi, no celebrity guests, but there was love, so much love. Inside, the smell of fresh bread and flowers mixed with the soft music of a violin, played by a young student from the Renata Institute. The tables had been pushed aside to make space in the middle of the dining room, and the staff, all former co-workers of Hailey, now served guests with genuine smiles and tear-filled eyes. Cole adjusted the sleeve of his simple white shirt, no suit, no tie. He looked visibly nervous, but there was peace in his eyes. At his side, Mr. Jefferson, the old neighborhood janitor and now one of the project's advisors, patted his back gently. "You have everything, son, but the best thing you ever did was giving it all up to earn what matters most." Cole nodded, taking a deep breath. On the other side of the restaurant, behind an improvised curtain of white linen, Hailey adjusted her brown hair tied in a low bun. She wore a white dress made of light fabric, simple, with lace details hand-stitched by women from the neighborhood. Mrs. Margaret, eyes misty and hands trembling, held a small bouquet of wildflowers. "You look beautiful, my girl," the grandmother said, her voice thick with emotion. Hailey smiled, gently touching the face of the woman who had always believed in her. "And you taught me what it means to love truthfully." The ceremony was led by a retired judge from the community who opened with words no one there would forget. "Love, when it's real, doesn't seek a spotlight. It's built quietly, between the rubble of pain and the bricks of hope." When Cole saw Hailey walking down the narrow aisle between the tables, his eyes filled with tears. She walked slowly, with the calm smile of someone who had already cried all she needed to, and now carried only gratitude. When they met, their hands joined as if they had never let go since that first touch. "Are you sure?" he whispered, almost smiling. "I am, because now I know who you are, and more than that, I know who we are." When they said yes, the applause didn't explode. It warmed. It came from people who knew the story, who lived the ups and downs, who had seen the fall and the rebuilding up close. Later that night, with the restaurant lit only by candles and string lights, Cole and Hailey danced slowly between the tables. There was no dance floor, no DJ, just the two of them and the distant sound of an old radio. And then, as the screen gently faded to black, Hailey's voice came in as a whisper from the soul. He had everything, but only when he let go of the armor was he truly loved. And me, I discovered that the one thing we never lacked was truth. The camera slowly pulled away, rising past the hanging lights, gliding over the tables, the smiling faces, and the hands held tightly together. On the final title card, white over a dark background, appeared the question that now made perfect sense. Would you help someone without knowing what they have to offer you? Now tell me, what did you think of this story? Leave your rating from 0 to 10 in the comments and share which part moved you the most. If this story touched your heart, like the video, share it with someone special, and subscribe to the channel to keep following narratives about love, resilience, and second chances. And before you go, I've picked another touching story that's sure to move you even more. Just click the screen and keep this journey going with us.